Greetings. I am Patrick Rogers, political leader of the Belize Progressive Party, and you are watching Belizean Legends.
The head or the chairman of the Belize Progressive Party, one of the most foremost third-party political forces that have emerged in Belize today, and that is none other than Brother Patrick Rogers. Today we want to discuss with Brother Patrick Rogers the whole aspects of the International Court of Justice and the compromise that was signed between the Belize government and the Guatemalan government in 2008, in December of 2008. And that compromise was a first step for Belize and Guatemala to take the long-lasting dispute, the Belize-Guatemalan dispute, the long-lasting Belize-Guatemalan dispute to the International Court of Justice. It so happens that after so many different proposals that was presented, first of all, the 13 or the 17 proposals called the Webster proposals in 1968, then the Heads of Agreement in 1981, and right after that the Maritime Areas Act in 1991, and the Ramphal-Rittler agreements in the 2000s, and now here we are with this compromise that Belize and Guatemala will have to have referendums in both countries from their people. In other words, to say if the people agree to take the claim, the Guatemalan claim, to the International Courts of Justice. We want to welcome you, Brother Patrick Rogers, to the studios of Belizean Legends. Welcome, my brother.
Greetings and thanks for having me, Brother Bilal. I really appreciate an opportunity being given to me to express an alternative route to go into the ICJ. Both political parties have come together in determining that that's the best course of action for Belize, and hopefully by the ending of this interview you all will understand why we at the BPP have maintained from 2008 we need to vote no to the ICJ. You'll understand why we need the ICJ option to not be an option, although it's been tabled as the only option. Belize will learn that after we get past that step, which is a needed, it's a prerequisite to reach into the preferred avenue to be settling this dispute, and that would be at the United Nations Security Council, which I will allude to further on in the interview.
Political participation goes very far back. You are a renowned accountant in Belize. You have been a businessman for many years and have as well served in the public service. Give us just a brief historical analysis of your work as an activist, businessman, and a Belizean progressive in the country of Belize.
Okay, certainly, Brother Bilal. If I could, I returned to Belize in 1991 after completing my studies in Texas. I came out to California right here and actually lived out here for 2.5 years. So I am in effect one diasporan Belizean that returned home. It's just that my tenure over here was only 7 years. But the truth of the matter is that upon returning home, I was told by Her Hestat that Belize's biggest problem was the brain drainage, where we would have our brightest minds migrating, getting higher education, getting the exposure and the experience, which is education in and of itself, but not returning home. So I came up on a student visa, whereas all my family had gotten their green card and are subsequent citizens. It wasn't until the green card started popping up, my mom said, "Well, Patrick, where is yours?" And I said, "Well, I told you all, my life is in Belize. I want to help Belize." So getting back in 1991, because it's not just myself, it's my siblings, my brothers bought into the idea that we should take what we've learned and go back to Belize and try and help to build Belize. Well, in effect, the kind of obstacles we run into, Brother Bilal, I'm sure you can attest to, as every other Belizean that has tried returning home. It's like, they're not home with God. You feel like we're not being facilitated, and the problem is that we were too independent, Belize. We never told the party line, red or blue. We went back to help, and we tried helping. So our first attempt to establish one private sixth form in Belize, after having attained ATLIB accreditation, the association level of tertiary institutions in Belize, ATLIB, had already given the training center tertiary level standings. At the time it was crashed. No? So after seeing our economic base pretty much dismantled and not being fully aware of what had taken place back then, I said I knew there was a lesson to be learned from what we had suffered as a family economically. And sure enough, a few years after, it was revealed that in order to not have a third party grow in Belize, they needed to wipe out our economic base along with Derek Aikman. So at about the time Derek Aikman was wiped out, if you want, for the lack of a better word, declared a bankrupt and rendering him incapable of contesting elections again. Well, Derek Aikman would have succeeded Golson as leader of the National Alliance for Belizean Rights, the neighbor party. And Golson had already had his eyes on me, grooming me as a younger person, younger than Aikman, so that there would be succession for this third party that would have taken root in Belize had it worked out to plan. So in effect, after recovering from that lake, and well, we lose a substantial amount of money, but it wasn't everything, I decided to try and level the playing field for the next bright Belizean family trying to come back and help. And so it was a bit of searching, not knowing quite best how I would be able to fit in helping. And so I went through a lot of activism. I've been involved with a lot of organizations, social organization that is involved in activism. Addiction Alert was actually the first social organization I was involved with, which was a humble attempt after identifying the fact that there were no rehabilitation facilities in Belize. So if you become one drunk, that's it, you're gonna die one drunk. So basically Addiction Alert was a humble attempt at trying to establish one rehabilitation center in Belize, because we had identified that as one of the services that were lacking and needed in Belize. Addiction Alert United for Human Development was an initiative that started before Youth for the Future and CYDP. And a humble attempt at bringing the business people together, coming up with a plan. The plan had called for one credit union and everything, with 15 business people contributing half the startup capital for the credit union, and then we have called on the government to match that with the involvement of the private sector assisting. The long and short of it is that United for Human Development was taken over by the political directorate, and we ended up at, I think it was Youth for the Future that came first, which was wholly government run and hasn't done anything for youth since. CYDP again, without the involvement of the private sector, it's a partnership that is needed to address the problems that Belize have, and nothing that the government tries to do by itself will work until they bring the private sector on board to facilitate with job placement for some of these troubled youths and stuff. So after United for Human Development failed, that was when I got into the Political Reform Commission. These were a bunch of brilliant Belizeans that were consulted as to what reform initiatives were most needed to start getting Belize on the right track. This was in 96, 97. So out of that Political Reform Commission is where I think my consciousness was elevated after sharing information and with so many brilliant Belizeans. And I realized how much of a trouble Belize we were in, or has been in from then. And that is why I gave up and trying to work through one of the two mainstream parties and realizing that there must be some other direction the country can go. So I eventually moved from just, being active in social institutions to becoming an activist, to now being both activist and politician, in the sense that we're trying to build an alternative political movement for the country. But until that time, we have to still be involved with a lot of activism, because through activism, we're able to get one broader acceptance of the issues that we put forth. So on national issues, we tend to use activist organizations, as in the case of the BTV, trying to get awareness of the matter on the ground. Doesn't matter what the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Cabinet is saying. The reality on the ground is very different. And so BTV has done what no other organization has done, which is to raise the awareness of the populace as to what the reality on the ground is down south in that source too. So we haven't let go of activism. I'm a founding member of COLA, Citizens Organized for Liberty Through Action. Whenever anyone comes up with any good idea, we see it as a spoke in the we. So we help people plan around that good idea and implement it, because there's a lot of problems that Belize has. And so a lot of solutions are required, but the solutions has to be part of a holistic planning where it's not being implemented in isolation. So that is what brought me to where I'm at today. Now, if we could proceed to some of the good stuff, because it's not about the messenger, but about our message that I bring to the
I want you to stick a pin right there, Brother Patrick, and I just want to say, you're looking at viewing Belizean Legends, and we are speaking with Brother Patrick Rogers, the leader of the Belize Progressive Party, which is the third party in Belize that recently contested the general elections that occurred in November 5th of last year, and the BPP did excellently well, and I think that was a very excellent effort in making the first attempt in terms of vying as a third force political party. I want to go straight into this document, Brother Patrick Rogers, that you shared with me, and I delved into it in depth over the last couple days, and I wanted you to give our viewers a very, very clear understanding of what is it that we in Belize are looking at. What is it that is at risk? What is it that we are gambling with? Or are we gambling with anything in taking the Belize Guatemalan dispute to the International Court of Justice? You highlighted and underscored some very important situations, especially with Article 2 of the official text. And you sort of technocratically broke down that whole series of laws and rules and regulations that are binding that compromise. Give our viewers an understanding of what is it that we are looking at here if the Belize Guatemalan dispute goes to the International Court of Justice after referendum.
Thanks, Brother Bilal. Well, basically, the term compromis is the word used to refer to a treaty, because it was a treaty signed by the executive of Guatemala and Belize with the OAS involvement. This treaty was signed without consultation with the people of Belize. So it was an executive decision that was taken to sign that treaty worded the way it is worded, Belize. And so from the time it was signed in secret, as we say, because secret outside the eyes of the Belizean, or input from the Belizean people, not secret as in not in front of a camera, but it was signed in Washington, and personally we did not see the compromise document until we had gotten a look at it through the Prensa newspaper from Guatemala. So although our media houses were present, they did not get a copy of the full document. Now whenever we need to comment, we need to read from start to finish of these documents. So until I got my hands on it, I couldn't make an assessment of what had taken place. But immediately upon receiving a copy of the compromise, it was signed December 8, 2008. I think we saw it about December 12th. It was a Friday, we saw it the Monday. Immediately, the Minister of Foreign Affairs law partner, no less than Attorney Sharon Pitts, took the time out to go wait for this man to finish a radio show on the Canandala show, to throw eggs at his vehicle because she had been so disgusted with the change of position that he had led Belize through. So I am not the first person to refer to the Honorable Foreign Minister as a traitor to Belize. His very own law partner, I want to go on record as saying this, Sharon Pitts, one votes night like myself, like yourself, understood clearly, Belize, that this represented one major shift in position at the negotiating table for our country. So I felt back then, I started calling for the treaty to be taken to the Senate. In the laws of Belize, it is the Senate, the arm of the legislative branch of government. We have the House of Representatives and our Senate. Whereas the House is elected, the Senate is not, and it's often referred to as a rubber stamp, which I concur it is. However, the law is the law, and the law states that treaties need to be ratified. The executive cannot bind the country on its own until the document is taken to the legislative arm of government. So immediately, the first point I raised was that Article 6 in the compromise states that instruments of ratification needs to be presented to the OAS. The document is comprised of a few articles, but the first one I was drawing reference to is Article 6, which calls for the ratification of the treaty. And the reason I'm highlighting Article 6 first is because Guatemala had successfully negotiated her best case scenario. So she had no problem with making this thing legal by taking it to her Congress, and within less than a month, their Congress had ratified the compromise, making it law, saying we're ready to go to the ICJ under these terms and conditions. Belize, on the other hand, having suffered one bit of a whiplash with the law partner from the Minister of Foreign Affairs and people like myself saying there's something wrong here, but it may be able to be fixed when it's taken to the Senate, where maybe we could find patriotic Belizeans who don't want to be considered traitors that are willing to table some amendments to the compromise, the treaty as it was signed.
Or even to reject it like Gregor Aleman did in the maritime era.
Exactly.
A party inside that actually opposed it, the minister.
Exactly. So, because those were my exact words, to be honest, Brother Bilal, I said, well, there's an opportunity for us to kill it at the Senate. Because from day one, we knew that the ICJ is not the only option. And that is what is so frustrating, because PUP and the UDP have come together to make it as though this is the be-all, end-all, the only option available to Belize. And it's
did the same thing with the maritime.
And
they all came
the case
together.
is so airtight and we won't lose. And that is hogwash, Belize. It is not the only option available. There are alternatives, and hence the reason we've been saying, let's kill this option immediately, because it's the only option that is guaranteed for us to lose land. And I'll explain a little bit later on that guarantee that we will lose land under the current conditions of the compromise. But the fact is that we start calling for the ratification of this compromise in the Senate, hoping that the discussion around the document would have been, heightened while the discussion in the Senate is ongoing. We said, let's get this thing to the Senate and kill it in the Senate.
Yes.
But if it's not killed in the Senate, if the Senate rubber stamps it and we go to a referendum, then we need to vote no at the referendum as well to guarantee that that option is not given to settle this Anglo-Guatemalan dispute that has since morphed into the Belize-Guatemalan territorial dispute. So that word territorial was never there when it was Anglo-Guatemalan dispute. It was always an issue of some monetary compensation that is needed for Guatemala, because she felt she has been aggrieved due to the fact that England, if you use colonization norms, Belize, rights of conquest was accepted, because none of the European powers respected the Treaty of Versailles, which basically the Pope said the only two European powers that were under the Pope jurisdiction was Portugal and Spain. So the Pope divided the New World and Africa between Portugal and Spain. But none of the European powers ever respected that treaty. And so every European power in their turn, as they become the world power, engage in wars with Portugal and Spain and with themselves.
Every aspect of it.
Exactly, and with themselves to use right of conquest to be conquering territories. So if we use this US as an example, the US had one battle with England. The French helped them, and so they can use right of conquest that they won their independence by conquering the territory, the 13 colonies from Mother England. But the US also did something else that was considered a norm under colonization time, which is to use money to purchase large blocks of land. So the Louisiana Purchase from same Napoleon, 15 million I think the amount was, the Louisiana Purchase is the example I use to show where it was accepted under colonization norms for monetary compensation to be able to secure large, vast tracts of land. Colonization norms had it where rights of conquest, yes. Purchasing of territories, yes. So you have Little Belize settlement now, 1798. It wasn't the British government. It was some, what we call white cat, mosquito. 2,000 of them were brought into the settlement to work alongside 3,000 African. This is in 1786, 12 years before the Battle of St. George's Key. So with 1,000 English buccaneers, because they were pirates who became buccaneers, who stole the term baymen from the Mosquito Kingdom, who were the settlers that were more often referred to as baymen than anybody else. So the
Thanks for that correction, Brother Patrick.
Yeah, because
very historical, right?
Samuel Higgins knew what he was saying when he said
very historical.
Both
of you are following the chronological order in which you are presenting that background history to this whole dispute.
So what we had is that you have these quote-unquote baymen, which the white cats are used the term for the mosquito, as we call them back home. White cat, one of the term mean brown law, which is a rating they use. So we have the white cat, the African slaves, and the European descendants who were the buccaneers, to be no baymen. And the white cat who were warriors, who decided they don't want to be running up the river to run from the Yucatan Spanish province ships, navy that was coming to burn out the settlement. They opted to stay and fight. So if not for the mosquito and the African taking a stand, and I understand the Garifuna as well had a bit to do in that war coming up there, because they were granted, though it's not full land rights, they were granted some rights to settle in the Belize territory down south. So the baymen, which that is a mixture of people, came together and through right of conquest conquered what was the Belize settlement. However, the crux of the matter is that at 1798, the people that were logging in the territory that started to settle did not reach Sarstoon as yet. And this is the reality, this is the history that has happened. No? So it wasn't until Guatemala got independence from Spain, they piggybacked Mexico, winning the independence from Spain. They never fought for theirs. And later on, when they broke away, 1823, within, I think, 8 or 9 years, 1831, Guatemala, as an independent republic, laid claim to Belize. And their claim is through a colonization norm called succession. So this is the third colonization norm that I want to mention: rights of conquest, monetary compensation, and succession, where the newly independent territories that got their independence usually claim that they inherited this territory. Whatever their colonial masters were controlling, they now exercise that control. So Guatemala first introduced her rights to the territory through succession in 1839. 1 year later, the British put Belize under its first step, not a crown colony, but a colony. So we were effectively, for the first time, taken under the wings of the British to establish British administration in the settlement. Now, the encroachment began at that point, where the Andorranian Spanish authorities reported sighting the British at the Rio Gorda, which is the Rio Sarstoon today, was then known as the Rio Gorda. That's where Punta Gorda got its name from. But the fact of the matter is that the dynamics at play at the time is that the US wanted England to accept that Guatemala had sovereignty before rights of conquest was added. Right of conquest only conquered what Spain had signed for logging rights to the British settlers. So they're saying right of conquest did not fetch you Cebu to Sarstoon. Guatemala had sovereignty over that. You encroached, you expanded your logging efforts all the way down south and westward. So we feel you should compensate Guatemala for that. That has been the US position from 1856. So Clayton-Buller Treaty in the 1850s. Around those time, England and America were going through one back and forth where chess match with mother and daughter. But in effect, England was very upset that because she gave up the Bluefield settlement, she gave up the Bay Islands and Honduras because those were effectively under British administration. That she felt she should have gotten Honduras to Sarstoon without compensation. America never accepted that position, and so America advised her, reach out on settlement with Guatemala, right? Work out something, but you have to compensate her the way I bought the Louisiana Purchase.
America being that was the main, Guatemala's main supporter.
Yes, and ally.
An ally, even up to today, militarily and
Everything.
economically. Yeah.
Yes, but there was a president who came into power, Buchanan, and Buchanan allowed one of his very good friends, an American lawyer physicist called William Walker. Now, the Mosquito Kingdom was one torn in at the side for the Spanish authorities on the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua, and they refused to go away. So in an effort to bring an end to the Mosquito on the Atlantic coast, the US allowed William Walker to bring an expedition down and conquered the Mosquito Atlantic coast. But he didn't stop there. He went ahead and effectively took administration of the entire Nicaraguan country and declared himself president. So in 1856 and 1857, an American adventurer named William Walker declared himself and was immediately backed by President Buchanan as president of Nicaragua. He got ambitious and decided he wanted to unify the Central American Republic back and started engaging in wars with El Salvador. So the dynamics at play in 1857 is such that although Guatemala and Honduras allied with El Salvador were able to withstand William Walker's advances and he had to retreat and left, they knew he was going to be coming back. So Guatemala figured that she could stop British encroachment if she got to the table with the 1859 convention and have an ally against this American adventurer who was wreaking havoc in Central America, William Walker. So in 1859, Guatemala came to the table, figuring that one, she would have an ally against this big threat, this American, who had the backing of the US president, and it would stop the British encroachment to where it was at. Hence the 1859 treaty. But Article 7 was a compensatory clause. So in line with Article 7, in 1860, engineers from Spain and France put together the budget for that road, called Road and Riverways, and they came up with 140,000, I want to say pounds, but it could be dollars for that, I'm pretty sure it's pounds. So they requested of England 70,000 pounds. England said that was too much, she didn't want to pay that, and there was a back and forth, and so it came down about 2 years after England made a counter offer and said, I am willing to pay you 50,000 pounds, but you only have 6 months to accept this. Guatemala got into a war with El Salvador, and the Congress never got to ratifying that in 6 months period. And so 2 years later, when they contacted the British and said, well, you know what, we've thought it through, we're willing to accept that 50,000. The British said, I have been exonerated, I don't owe you anything, you had 6 months to make up your mind. So that is the genesis of the Anglo-Guatemala dispute. The fact that the British took that stand, that they have been exonerated and they don't need to pay anything. They had the might over Guatemala, and so matters kind of stayed like that up until the 1940s. In that exchange, Guatemala pretty much pulled out of ratifying those exchange notes. They were presented to the United Nations on their own by the British, not with the Guatemalan backing, because they wanted more response on the compensation. And what did they do? They effectively tabled to England, well, here, if you don't want to pay me to settle this, let me pay you 400,000. Again, we'll say pounds, it could be dollars. I'll check and verify for you whether it was pounds or dollars. But the figure was 400,000. And if you do not want to accept that, then you pay me 400,000. So it was wrong, you know. Either ways, let's settle this thing monetarily. I give you 400,000, or you give me 400,000. If you don't want to pay the 400,000, add 4% interest to that 50,000 from 1862, bring it to 1940. It would have been a bigger figure. The British snubbed them, never even replied. But the point I'm making with those bits of history there, Belize, is that Guatemala was willing to accept monetary compensation to settle what was being dubbed the Anglo, being the British, the term used for British. The Anglo-Guatemalan dispute was a monetary dispute.